The crystal chandelier sparkled above the grand ballroom like 1,000 tiny stars. Margaret moved quietly between the guests, her black uniform crisp and clean, her shoes making barely a sound on the marble floor. She'd been doing this job for 3 years now, and she knew exactly how to be invisible. That's what good help was supposed to be, after all. Seen but not noticed, tonight was the biggest event of the year at the Huntington Mansion. The annual charity gala. Over 100 people had shown up, each one wearing clothes that probably cost more than Margaret made in 6 months. The women glittered in their evening gowns, diamonds catching the light with every movement. The men stood in perfectly tailored suits, their watches heavy and expensive on their wrists. Margaret carried a silver tray of champagne glasses, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. She'd learned to tune out most of the conversations. They were always the same anyway. Stock markets and vacation homes, new cars and country club gossip. These people lived in a different world, and she was just passing through it, picking up their empty glasses and bringing them fresh drinks. The ballroom was something out of a magazine. Flowers everywhere, white roses and orchids that must have cost a fortune. Long tables covered in silk tablecloths, loaded with food that looked almost too pretty to eat. And in the corner, commanding attention even when silent, sat the grand piano, a Steinway, black and gleaming, worth more than most houses. Margaret had noticed it the first day she'd started working here. How could she not? But she'd learned quickly not to look at it too long. It stirred up things inside her that were better left alone. Memories she'd locked away in a box marked another lifetime. Tonight there was a pianist playing, some young man hired for the evening. He was good, she supposed, though she tried not to listen too carefully. "More champagne over here," someone called out, and Margaret hurried over with her tray. Richard Huntington, the man who owned all of this, was holding court in the center of the room. He was in his element tonight, surrounded by friends and admirers. 50-something with silver hair and a smile that showed too many teeth. He'd made his fortune in real estate, buying up properties all over the city. People said he was ruthless in business, but tonight he was all charm and laughter. Margaret had learned to stay out of his way. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he had a way of looking right through her, like she was furniture. She preferred it that way, less complicated. The hired pianist stood up and announced he was taking a short break. The conversations grew louder without the music to compete with. Margaret headed back to the kitchen for more hors d'oeuvres, grateful for a moment away from the crowd. "You doing okay out there?" Linda, the cook, asked. She'd worked for the Huntingtons for 10 years and had a kind face. "Same as always," Margaret replied, loading up another tray with tiny pastries topped with caviar. She'd never tasted caviar. Probably never would. "Big crowd tonight, Mr. Huntington's in rare form." Margaret just nodded. She picked up the tray and pushed back through the swinging door into the ballroom. That's when she heard it, her name, loud and clear across the room. "Margaret, come here for a moment." Her heart sank. She knew that tone. She'd heard Richard Huntington use it before when he was showing off for his friends. She set down her tray on a side table and walked toward him, keeping her face neutral. He was standing with a group of about 8 people, all holding drinks, all looking entertained by whatever story he'd just finished telling. They turned to look at her as she approached. "Yes, Mr. Huntington," she said quietly. "Margaret, you've been working for us for what, 3 years now?" "Yes, sir. And you do excellent work. Very reliable." He was smiling, but there was something in his eyes that made her uneasy. "Tell me something. Have you ever played a piano?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. She felt her mouth go dry. In the past, yes, sir. In the past." He laughed, and his friends chuckled along with him. "Well, we've got this beautiful instrument just sitting there while Thomas is on his break. Why don't you go over and play us something? Give it a try. I'm sure everyone would love to hear what you can do." The way he said it made it clear. This was entertainment for him. For all of them. Look at the maid trying to play the fancy piano. It would be amusing. Something to laugh about later. Margaret felt her cheeks burn. She looked at the faces surrounding her. Some looked curious. Others were already smiling, anticipating the joke. A few looked uncomfortable, like they sensed this wasn't quite right but weren't going to speak up. She could say no. She could make an excuse and return to the kitchen. That would be the smart thing. The safe thing, but something stirred inside her. Something she thought had died years ago. Pride maybe, or anger. Or just exhaustion from being treated like she was less than human because she cleaned houses for a living. Her eyes drifted to the piano, the beautiful gleaming Steinway that she'd been avoiding for 3 years. Her fingers tingled. It had been so long, 25 years since she'd played seriously. She probably couldn't even remember how. "I wouldn't want to disturb your guests, Mr. Huntington," she said carefully. "Nonsense. You won't disturb anyone. We'd all be delighted, wouldn't we?" He looked around at his friends, who nodded and murmured agreement, though their eyes said they just wanted to see what would happen next. Margaret stood there, frozen in the moment. She thought about her daughter at home, probably helping her own kids with homework. She thought about the bills on her kitchen table, always more bills than money. She thought about her back that ached at the end of every shift and her hands that were rough from cleaning supplies. And then she thought about something else. She thought about a girl she used to be, a girl who'd sat at a piano for hours every day, her fingers flying across the keys. A girl who'd dreamed bigger than this, a girl who'd had to give it all up. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was anger. Maybe it was just 3 years of being invisible finally reaching a breaking point. Whatever it was, Margaret heard herself say, "All right, Mr. Huntington, I'll play something for you." The surprise on his face was brief, quickly replaced by amusement. "Wonderful. Everyone, Margaret here is going to perform for us." The room seemed to shift its attention. Conversations paused. People turned to look. Word spread quickly through the crowd. The maid was going to play the piano. This should be interesting. Margaret walked toward the Steinway, her legs feeling strange beneath her, like they belonged to someone else. The crowd parted to let her through. She could feel every eye on her back, could hear the whispers starting. When she reached the piano bench, she stopped. Her hands were shaking. The keys seemed to glow in the chandelier light, white and black, familiar and foreign all at once. She sat down slowly, adjusting her position like she'd done thousands of times before. In another life. Behind her, she heard someone say, "This is going to be painful to watch." Someone else laughed softly. Margaret placed her hands on the keys. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertips. For just a second, she closed her eyes. And in that darkness, she made a choice. If they wanted a show, she'd give them one. Just not the one they were expecting. She took a deep breath. Then she began to play. Before we understand what happened next in that ballroom, we need to go back, way back, to a time when Margaret wasn't Margaret the maid. She was just Margaret, a girl with a gift and a dream that seemed almost within reach. She grew up in a small apartment above her parents' dry cleaning shop. The place always smelled like steam and chemical solvents. Her father worked 16-hour days, pressing shirts and cleaning suits for people who barely looked at him when they picked up their orders. Her mother worked right beside him, her hands raw from the work, her back permanently bent from years of leaning over the pressing machine. They'd come from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. And they had one dream for their daughter, a better life, a life where she wouldn't have to break her back for pennies. Margaret was 5 when her mother first took her to the community center. They had an old upright piano there, beaten up and out of tune. A volunteer gave lessons for free on Saturday mornings. Her mother signed her up, even though they could barely afford the bus fare to get there. The teacher, Mrs. Chen, was elderly and strict. She rapped Margaret's knuckles with a ruler when her fingers curved wrong, but she saw something in the little girl, a natural sense of rhythm, an ability to hear the music, really hear it, not just play the notes. "Your daughter has talent," she told Margaret's mother after the 3rd lesson. Real talent. She should have proper instruction. Proper instruction cost money they didn't have. But her parents found a way. They cut back on everything. No new clothes. No eating out, not even cheap takeout. Her father took on extra alterations work late into the night. Her mother started working Sundays. They found Margaret a real teacher, Mr. Patterson, who'd played with symphonies in his younger years. He charged $75 an hour, a fortune to them. But he agreed to take Margaret on, and something magical happened. She bloomed. By age 8, she was playing pieces that teenagers struggled with. By 10, she was winning local competitions. By 12, she was traveling to competitions in other states, her parents cramming into cheap motels, eating convenience store sandwiches to save money. Margaret practiced 4 hours a day after school. While other kids played outside or watched TV, she sat at the piano they'd bought secondhand, the only nice thing in their cramped apartment. her fingers moving across the keys, her mind lost in the music. It wasn't work to her. It was breathing. Her teachers started using words like prodigy, exceptional, gifted. Mr. Patterson pushed her harder, gave her the most difficult pieces. Rachmaninoff, Chopin, Liszt, compositions that made other students cry in frustration. Margaret attacked them with joy. When she was 17, Mr. Patterson sat down with her parents. "She needs to audition for Juilliard," he said. "It's one of the best music schools in the world. If she gets in, she could have a real career." Concert halls, recordings, the works. Her parents looked at each other. Juilliard meant New York. It meant money they definitely didn't have. But it also meant their daughter's dream could come true. "We'll find a way," her father said. Margaret auditioned on a cold February morning. She was so nervous she thought she might throw up. But when she sat at that piano and started playing, everything else disappeared. There was just her and the music, the way it had always been. 3 weeks later, the acceptance letter came. Full scholarship. They wanted her. Her mother cried. Her father cried. Margaret cried. The girl from the dry cleaning shop was going to Juilliard. Those first months in New York were like a dream. She was surrounded by other talented musicians, pushed by professors who'd performed all over the world. She practiced until her fingers bled, then wrapped them and practiced more. She was learning, growing, becoming the pianist she was meant to be. She called home every week. Her parents wanted to know everything, every detail. They were so proud they told everyone who came into the shop about their daughter at Juilliard. Then halfway through her second year, the call came. The one that changed everything. Her father had collapsed at work. A stroke, massive and devastating. He was alive, but barely. The left side of his body was paralyzed. He couldn't work. Might never work again. Margaret took the first bus home. When she walked into that hospital room and saw her father, the strong man who'd worked his whole life, lying there unable to move, unable to speak clearly, something broke inside her. The bills started coming immediately. Hospital bills, rehabilitation bills, medication. Insurance covered some, but not nearly enough. Her mother tried to run the dry cleaning shop alone, but it was too much for one person. Business dropped off. Money got tight, then desperate. Margaret sat in that small apartment looking at the stack of bills on the kitchen table, and she knew what she had to do. She was 19 years old, and her dream was ending before it really began. She withdrew from Juilliard. Her professors begged her to reconsider, to take a leave of absence, to find another way. But there was no other way. Her family needed money now, not in 4 years when she graduated. She got a job as a waitress, then a second job doing data entry at night. She sent every penny home. Her father slowly improved, but he'd never be the same. The medical bills kept coming. They lost the dry cleaning shop, had to move to a cheaper apartment in a worse neighborhood. Margaret's piano sat in the corner, gathering dust. She couldn't afford to have it moved when they relocated, couldn't afford the space for it anyway. She sold it for $200 to help pay rent. The years blurred together. She met a man, got married too young to someone who seemed stable, had a daughter, beautiful and perfect. The marriage fell apart 3 years later. He left, didn't pay child support, disappeared into whatever life he'd wanted that didn't include them. Now it was just Margaret and her daughter, working 2, sometimes 3 jobs, trying to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Her father passed away when her daughter was 5. Her mother followed 2 years later. The grief was crushing, but there was no time to properly mourn. Bills don't stop coming because your heart is broken. She took any work she could get. Cleaned offices at night, worked retail, did catering for events where people ate food that cost more than her weekly grocery bill. Eventually, she landed the job with the Huntingtons. The pay was decent, the work steady. She was grateful for it, even if it meant being invisible, even if it meant watching other people live the kind of life she'd once dreamed about. 25 years had passed since she'd left Juilliard. 25 years since she'd really played piano. Oh, sometimes late at night she'd find herself sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers moving in the air, playing pieces from memory on invisible keys. Muscle memory is a strange thing. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Her daughter was grown now, with kids of her own. Working as a nurse, doing good, honest work. She'd turned out fine despite everything. That was Margaret's real accomplishment. Not the competition she'd won or the scholarship to Juilliard. but raising a good human being while the world tried to knock them both down. She'd made peace with how things had turned out. Or at least she'd learned to live with it. The piano was part of another life. A girl who didn't exist anymore. She was Margaret the maid now. That was enough. It had to be. Except now, sitting at this Steinway in this mansion full of people who expected her to embarrass herself, all those years came flooding back. Her fingers on the keys felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost, and in that moment Margaret decided something. She'd given up her dream once to save her family. She'd spent 25 years being practical, being responsible, being invisible. Just this once, just for these few minutes, she was going to be the pianist again. Not for them. For that 19-year-old girl who'd cried when she withdrew from Juilliard. For her parents who'd sacrificed everything. For every dream that life had forced her to set aside, she pressed down on the first key. The first note rang out clear and pure in the silent ballroom. Then the second. Then her hands began to move, and the room filled with music. Margaret had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful and technically demanding pieces ever written. It was the piece she'd been preparing for her final Juilliard recital, the one she never got to perform. She'd played it 1,000 times in her youth, and her fingers remembered every single note. Behind her, the laughter died instantly. Someone's champagne glass stopped halfway to their lips. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't chopsticks. This wasn't some fumbling attempt at Mary Had a Little Lamb. This was real music, played by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Margaret's fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. Her hands crossed over each other, stretched across octaves, attacked the keys with power, and then pulled back to whisper soft passages that made your heart ache. The piano sang under her touch. It cried. It soared. She kept her eyes closed, lost somewhere else entirely. In her mind, she wasn't in this mansion wearing a maid's uniform. She was 19 again, sitting in a practice room at Juilliard, the future spread out before her like an open road. She was every dream she'd ever had, every hope that had been crushed, every sacrifice that had carved pieces out of her soul. 25 years of pain poured through her fingers into that piano. Every double shift worked while her feet screamed in pain. Every bill she couldn't quite pay. Every time she'd bitten her tongue while someone treated her like she was nothing. Every night she'd cried quietly in the bathroom so her daughter wouldn't hear. Every single moment of the life she'd lived instead of the life she'd dreamed about. But it wasn't just pain in the music. There was beauty too. The pride she felt watching her daughter graduate nursing school. The quiet satisfaction of keeping a roof over their heads when everything seemed impossible. The strength she'd found in herself that she never knew existed. All of it flowed through her hands into the keys, turning into something that transcended words. Richard Huntington stood frozen, his smile gone completely. His face had gone pale. He looked like someone had just slapped him awake from a deep sleep. The joke he'd been making wasn't funny anymore. It had never been funny, and now everyone could see it. His wife stood beside him, one hand over her mouth, tears starting to form in her eyes. Around the room, people were having similar reactions. Some stood perfectly still, afraid to move and break the spell. Others swayed slightly, unconsciously moving with the music. Several were openly crying. The hired pianist, Thomas, had come back from his break. He stood in the doorway to the ballroom, absolutely still, his eyes wide. He'd gone to music school, played in competitions, performed at weddings and parties for wealthy people just like this for years. He was good at what he did. But what he was hearing now was something different. Something beyond technical skill. This was music that came from somewhere deeper than practice and training. This was a soul speaking. An older woman near the front dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. She leaned over to her husband and whispered, "I saw Horowitz play once at Carnegie Hall. This reminds me of that." Her husband just nodded, unable to speak. Margaret played on, unaware of any of it. In her mind, she was everywhere and nowhere. She was 5 years old at the community center, discovering the piano for the first time. She was 12, winning her first real competition while her parents beamed in the audience. She was 17, getting that acceptance letter from Juilliard. She was 19, sitting in a hospital room watching her father struggle to breathe. She was 25, holding her newborn daughter and promising to give her a better life. She was 30, working 3 jobs and falling asleep on the bus. She was right now 52 years old, tired and invisible, playing like her life depended on it. The music built to a crescendo. Her hands hammered the keys with controlled fury, the sound filling every corner of the massive room. Then just as suddenly it pulled back. Soft now, tender, like a lullaby, like a goodbye. Her fingers danced across the keys so lightly they barely seemed to touch them, creating notes that floated in the air like soap bubbles. Some people in the crowd had taken out their phones. They were recording this. They didn't know what they were witnessing exactly, but they knew it was something special, something that needed to be captured and saved. A teenage girl there with her parents stood with tears streaming down her face. She'd been taking piano lessons for 6 years and hated every minute of it. Her parents made her practice, made her perform at recitals. She'd been planning to quit, but listening to Margaret play, something shifted inside her. This was why people played piano. Not because they had to, because they needed to, because the music demanded to be let out. Margaret's fingers moved through the final passages of the movement. The notes climbed higher and higher, building tension, releasing it, building it again. Her whole body moved with the music now. She swayed. Her shoulders rose and fell. She became part of the piano, or the piano became part of her. It was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And then, with a final cascade of notes that seemed to fall like water, she finished. Her hands lifted from the keys and settled in her lap. She sat there completely still, her eyes still closed. Tears ran down her cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them away. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single person moved. Not a cough. Not a whisper. Nothing. The moment hung there, suspended, like everyone was afraid that making a sound would shatter something precious. Margaret opened her eyes slowly. She looked down at her hands, surprised to find them shaking. She'd done it. After 25 years, she'd really played again. And her hands had remembered. Her heart had remembered. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first. Then another. Then suddenly the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering, shouting. Several people whistled. The sound was deafening. Margaret turned around on the piano bench, startled. She'd almost forgotten there were people watching. She saw all these faces, these wealthy strangers in their expensive clothes. And every single one of them was looking at her differently now. Not through her, at her, really seeing her for the first time. She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. She didn't know what to do. Should she bow? Go back to work? Run out of the room? She felt exposed and raw, like she'd just shown these people her naked soul. The applause continued. Grew louder. People in the back of the room who hadn't been able to see pushed forward, wanting to get a better look at this woman who'd just done the impossible. Richard Huntington stood there, his face red now, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He'd meant to embarrass her, to make her the butt of a joke his friends would laugh about over their next golf game. Instead, he'd done something else entirely. He'd given her a stage, and she'd used it to show everyone exactly who she was. Thomas, the hired pianist, pushed through the crowd. He reached Margaret and grabbed both her hands in his. That was extraordinary, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. I've never... Where did you study? Who were your teachers? Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words. How could she explain? How could she make them understand? But she didn't have to, because in that moment, in that ballroom full of people who'd never given her a second thought, everything had changed. The maid had disappeared, and in her place stood a pianist, an artist, someone who'd been hidden in plain sight for years. The truth was about to come out. Margaret stood there, surrounded by applause, still trying to catch her breath. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thomas, the hired pianist, was staring at her like she'd just walked on water. Please, he said, still holding her hands. You have to tell me. Where did you train? That level of skill doesn't just happen. I've performed with symphony orchestras, and I've rarely heard anyone play with that kind of emotion and technique. Margaret looked at him. At all of them. 100 faces waiting for an answer. She could feel her throat tightening. This was supposed to be simple. She was supposed to serve drinks, clean up, and go home. Now everyone was looking at her, really looking at her, and she didn't know what to do with that attention. She started, her voice barely above a whisper. I went to Juilliard. A long time ago. The words dropped like a bomb. People gasped. Someone said Juilliard? Like they couldn't believe it. You went to Juilliard and you're working as a maid? A woman in a blue dress asked, not unkindly, just confused. Like the two things couldn't possibly go together in her mind. Margaret felt her eyes burning. She didn't want to cry again, not in front of all these people. But the story wanted to come out. Maybe it needed to come out. She'd kept it locked inside for so long, I had to leave, she said quietly. My father got sick. We had medical bills. I was the only one who could work. So I left school and I never went back. The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. People were listening. Really listening. Thomas shook his head slowly. How long ago? 25 years. 25 years, he repeated like he was trying to process it. You haven't played seriously in 25 years and you just performed like that? That's not possible. But it was possible. They'd all just seen it, heard it. An older gentleman pushed forward. He had white hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. Young lady, I'm a music professor. Retired now, but I taught at the conservatory for 35 years. What you just did was remarkable. That kind of talent is rare. Extraordinarily rare. More people started talking at once. Asking questions. Sharing opinions. The party had completely transformed. Nobody cared about the champagne anymore or the fancy food. They all wanted to know about Margaret. A woman stepped forward. She was maybe 40, wearing an elegant black dress, her dark hair pulled back. I'm Dr. Rodriguez, she said. I run the city's Performing Arts Center. I need your contact information. We need to talk. Talk about what? Margaret asked, bewildered. About you playing again. Professionally. That talent can't be wasted cleaning houses. She caught herself. No offense intended. It's honest work. But you're meant for more than that, Margaret felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. An hour ago, she'd been invisible. Now everyone wanted something from her. She looked around for an escape route, but there were people everywhere. That's when Richard Huntington finally found his voice. He pushed through the crowd, his face still flushed, his confidence from earlier completely gone. His wife walked beside him and she looked upset. Margaret, he said, and his voice cracked a little. I need to apologize. What I did was cruel. I don't know what I thought. That it would be funny, I suppose. But there's nothing funny about humiliating someone. I'm deeply, truly sorry. Margaret looked at him. This man who paid her salary, who'd treated her like furniture for 3 years, who'd just tried to embarrass her in front of 100 people. Part of her wanted to stay angry, but she was too tired for anger. And strangely, she felt something else. Something like pity. Mr. Huntington, she said slowly, you thought you were making me look small, but you actually gave me something I'd forgotten I had. You reminded me that I'm not just your maid. I'm a pianist. I'm an artist. That's who I really am underneath the uniform. His wife stepped forward, tears in her eyes. That was beautiful, she said. Both the music and what you just said. I'm so sorry for how we've treated you, for how invisible we made you feel. Other people in the crowd nodded. Some looked ashamed. They were starting to understand something. That they'd all done it too. Looked right through Margaret. Through all the people who served them, cleaned for them, made their comfortable lives possible. The teenage girl who'd been crying during the performance approached shyly. I take piano lessons, she said. But I hate it. Or I thought I did. But listening to you play, I've never heard anything like that. You made me understand why it matters. Margaret smiled at her, a real smile. Music isn't about the notes on the page, she told the girl. It's about what you pour into them. Your experiences. Your heart. Everything you've lived through. That's what makes it real. Dr. Rodriguez touched her arm gently. I mean what I said. The Performing Arts Center has programs. We have concerts, recitals, and we're always looking for instructors. You could teach. You could perform. The pay is good. Much better than... She trailed off, gesturing around the room. I don't know, Margaret said. It's been so long. Maybe tonight was just a fluke. That was no fluke, Thomas interjected. Trust me. I know the difference between someone who used to play and someone who's a true musician. You're the real thing. The retired professor nodded enthusiastically. I'd be happy to work with you. Help you get back into form. No charge. It would be an honor. Margaret felt overwhelmed. These were strangers offering her things that seemed impossible. A new job. Free lessons. A chance to play again. Really play. Not just once at a party, but as a career, the thing she'd given up half her lifetime ago. I have a daughter, she said, though she wasn't sure why that mattered, and grandchildren. I have responsibilities. Being a mother and grandmother doesn't mean you can't also be a pianist, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. You can be both. You deserve to be both. Someone in the crowd had been recording the performance on their phone. A man in his 30s with slicked back hair. I already posted this online, he said, holding up his phone. It's getting views. A lot of views. People are sharing it everywhere. Margaret's stomach dropped. You posted what? The video. Of you playing. Don't worry, you look amazing. And the story is incredible. The maid who turns out to be a Juilliard-trained pianist? People are eating it up. She didn't know how to feel about that. Her private moment, the most vulnerable thing she'd done in years, was now out there for the world to see. It felt invasive, but also maybe a little bit like destiny, like this was meant to happen. Richard Huntington cleared his throat. Margaret, I'd like to offer you a severance package. A generous one, and a letter of recommendation. Though after tonight, I don't think you'll need one from me. You should pursue this. The music. It's clear that's where you belong. You're firing me? She asked, surprised. No, he said quickly. I'm saying you should quit. Move on to something worthy of your talent. But I want to help make that transition easier for you. His wife nodded. It's the least we can do. Margaret looked around the room. At all these faces. Wealthy, privileged people who an hour ago wouldn't have given her a second glance. Now they were offering her opportunities. Respect. A chance at the life she'd thought was lost forever. But more than that, she'd shown them something. She'd shown them that people aren't just what they do for work. That the woman who cleans your house or serves your drinks might have depths you never imagined, might have sacrificed dreams you've never had to think about sacrificing, might have more talent in her little finger than you've developed in your entire comfortable life. Linda, the cook, pushed through from the back. She'd been watching from the kitchen doorway. She was crying. Margaret, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I had no idea. Nobody did, Margaret said softly. I made sure of that. Dr. Rodriguez pressed a business card into her hand. Call me tomorrow, please. Don't let this moment pass. Don't let another 25 years go by. Margaret looked down at the card, then at the piano, still gleaming in the corner, then at all these people, these witnesses to her resurrection. She thought about her daughter, who'd want her to take this chance, about her grandchildren, who should know their grandmother as more than just someone who worked hard, about the girl she used to be, who'd loved music more than breathing. She thought about her parents, gone now, who'd sacrificed everything so she could have a shot at her dreams. They'd be proud of her for taking care of the family when they needed it. But they'd be even more proud if she took care of herself too. If she let herself be more than just a survivor. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. Okay, I'll call you. The room erupted in applause again. But this time Margaret smiled. The video went viral overnight. By the time Margaret woke up the next morning, millions of people had watched it. The maid who stunned a mansion full of wealthy guests with her incredible piano performance. The comment section was flooded with reactions. People crying, people angry at how she'd been treated, people inspired by her story. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through her phone in disbelief. News outlets were picking it up. Local stations. Then national ones. Hidden talent revealed, the headlines read. Juilliard dropout stunning return to music after 25 years. Her daughter called, crying happy tears. Mom, everyone at the hospital is talking about you. They showed the video during break. I'm so proud of you. I don't understand what's happening, Margaret admitted. It was just one performance. It wasn't just one performance, Mom. It was 25 years of pain and love and sacrifice all coming out through your fingers. People can feel that. They can hear it in the music. Margaret called Dr. Rodriguez that afternoon like she'd promised. They met for coffee at a small cafe downtown. The director of the Performing Arts Center was warm and professional, but also genuinely excited. I've been flooded with calls since last night, she said. People want to know who you are, where you're performing next. I have a proposal for you, she laid it out. A position as a piano instructor at the center, teaching students 3 days a week. The pay was more than triple what Margaret made cleaning houses. Plus, they wanted her to perform. Small concerts at first to get her comfortable again, then bigger venues as she rebuilt her skills. I'm rusty, Margaret warned. Last night was running on pure emotion and muscle memory. I haven't practiced in decades. That's why we start small, Dr. Rodriguez said. And the retired professor who spoke to you last night? He called me. He wants to work with you, help you get back into performance shape. He said it would be the highlight of his retirement. Margaret felt tears welling up again. She seemed to cry a lot these days. Why are people being so kind? Because your story matters. Because you represent something people need to see. That it's never too late. That sacrifices don't have to be forever. That talent doesn't die just because life gets hard. Dr. Rodriguez reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You inspired people, Margaret. Let them help you now. The next few months were a whirlwind. Margaret gave her 2 weeks' notice to the Huntingtons. Richard insisted on the severance package he'd promised, enough to cover her expenses while she transitioned. His wife included a personal note apologizing again and wishing her well. The retired professor, whose name was Dr. Peterson, became her coach. They met twice a week at the Performing Arts Center. He was patient but demanding, the way good teachers are. Her hands were stiff at first. Her timing was off. But slowly, session by session, it came back. The muscle memory was still there, buried under years of not using it. You're remarkable, Dr. Peterson told her after a particularly good session. Most people who stop playing for this long never recover their skill. But you've got something special. Always did, I suspect. Margaret started teaching beginning piano students. She was nervous at first, worried she wouldn't be good at it. But she was. The kids loved her. She understood their frustrations because she'd lived them. She knew how to encourage without pressuring, how to make music fun instead of just technical. One of her students was a 7-year-old girl whose parents couldn't really afford lessons. Margaret worked out a reduced rate with the center, then quietly paid the difference herself. The girl reminded her of herself at that age. All potential and possibility. The video continued to spread. Talk shows reached out. Podcasts wanted interviews. It was overwhelming, but Margaret did a few. She talked about her journey, about sacrifice and family and the choices we make, about how easy it is to lose yourself in survival mode, about finding your way back. One interview went particularly viral. The host asked her if she regretted leaving Juilliard. Margaret thought about it carefully before answering. I regret that I had to make that choice, she said slowly. I regret that my family struggled the way we did. But I don't regret choosing them. My father needed me. My daughter needed me. Would I have liked to have both? The career and the family support, of course. But life doesn't always offer us both. So I chose love. And I'd choose it again. People responded to that. To the honesty of it. To the recognition that sometimes there are no good choices, just hard ones. 6 months after that night at the mansion, Margaret performed her first official solo concert at the Performing Arts Center. The venue held 300 people. It sold out in 2 hours. They added a second show. That sold out too. Her daughter came with the grandkids. They sat in the front row, the kids squirming in their seats until the music started. Then they went still, eyes wide, watching their grandmother do something they'd never imagined she could do. Thomas, the pianist from that first night, came. Dr. Peterson and his wife, Dr. Rodriguez, even Linda, the cook from the Huntington house, dressed up for the occasion. And in the back, looking uncomfortable in their fancy clothes, sat Richard and his wife. They'd bought tickets like everyone else. She spotted them before she went on stage and gave a small nod. They nodded back. Margaret wore a simple black dress. Nothing fancy. She walked on stage to thunderous applause. People were standing before she'd even played a note. She sat at the piano, a beautiful grand, and looked out at all those faces. For a moment, she was 19 again. This was the concert she was supposed to give all those years ago at Juilliard. The one that never happened because life got in the way. She'd thought that moment was lost forever. But here it was, just taking a different shape. A different time. A different her. She began to play. The same piece from that first night, Rachmaninoff. But this time she wasn't trying to prove anything. Wasn't running from pain or anger. She was just playing because she loved it. Because this was who she was supposed to be all along. The music filled the concert hall. People closed their eyes and swayed. Some cried. Some smiled. Some just listened with that look people get when they're experiencing something that touches their soul. When she finished, the applause was deafening. She stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face again. Happy tears this time. Grateful tears. Backstage afterward, she was surrounded by well-wishers. Her daughter hugged her tight. "Dad would have been so proud," she whispered. Both of them would have. The grandkids were bouncing with excitement. "Grandma, you're famous," the older one said. "Everyone at school knows about you," Margaret laughed. "I'm not famous, sweetie. I'm just a piano player." But she was more than that, and she knew it. She was a woman who'd lost her dream and found it again, who'd sacrificed everything and discovered that sacrifice didn't have to be the end of the story, who'd been invisible and became seen. A young woman approached nervously. She was maybe 20, clutching a program. "Ms. Margaret, I'm a music student. I was about to drop out because, well, money's tight and I didn't think I could make it work. But I saw your video, read your story, and I realized that even if I have to pause, it doesn't mean it's over. I can come back to it." "Like you did." Margaret took the young woman's hands. "Don't give up if you can help it. But if you have to make hard choices, make them. Take care of what matters most. The music will wait for you. I promise it will wait." More opportunities came. A recording studio wanted to produce an album. A documentary crew wanted to film her story. A publisher reached out about a book. It was all surreal and wonderful and terrifying. But the best part wasn't the opportunities or the attention. It was simpler than that. It was waking up in the morning excited about the day. It was having purpose beyond just survival. It was sitting at a piano and feeling whole again. She still taught her students. Still showed up for every lesson, every rehearsal. She hadn't forgotten where she came from or what it felt like to struggle. She started a scholarship fund for music students from low-income families, used some of her new earnings to help kids who reminded her of herself. A year after that first performance, Margaret stood backstage at a much larger venue. A real concert hall downtown. She was preparing for her biggest show yet. She could hear the crowd filing in. Over 1,000 people. She looked at herself in the mirror. 53 years old. Gray in her hair. Lines on her face. Hands that had scrubbed floors and changed diapers and worked themselves raw. The same hands that were about to play for 1,000 people. She thought about the millionaire who'd asked her to play as a joke. Who'd meant to humiliate her and instead set her free. Life was funny that way. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best ones. Sometimes what looked like an ending was actually a beginning. Someone knocked on the door. 5 minutes, Ms. Margaret." She took a deep breath, smiled at her reflection, then walked toward the stage, toward the piano, toward the rest of her life. It had taken 25 years and a cruel joke to get here. But she'd made it, and the music, patient and faithful, had waited for her all along. The world hadn't forgotten her. She'd forgotten herself. But now finally she remembered. And she would never forget again.